Look, I hate responsiveness, and I know you do too. So I wanted to keep this video really short, but I just could not justify cutting out many parts of this video. So because of that, I'm going to cut this introduction, and I'm just going to leave timestamps in the description for your leisure. Alright, to start, people say to start building your website in mobile view and then scale it up to desktop. I personally would not recommend this. First of all, in an actual job environment, you will probably be working off of Figma, and Figmas are usually built for desktop view. This is just the thing that creative teams usually do. You just have to get used to it as a developer. So because of this, it is a good reason to learn how to build in desktop first and then scale it down to mobile. Another reason is that a lot of high-paying customers for high-value products will usually be on a desktop device. So because of this, it's usually best to have your desktop view look the best and then scale it down to make it acceptable on mobile. Finally, the last reason is that you can have a desktop website with decoration, and then when you scale it down to mobile, you can remove that decoration. But it is a lot harder to have a mobile website and then add decoration after for desktop. Now before we continue, I do want to give a counter argument for mobile just in case you want to hear the other side as to why you should start on mobile. If you know ahead of time that your audience will primarily be on a mobile device, then obviously you want to build it for mobile first, but this is just if you know ahead of time and it's for client reasons only. One more thing to note is that if you're a Tailwind user, Tailwind's classes actually work best from mobile to desktop, but that's only a preference because honestly I had no issue going from desktop to mobile with Tailwind's responsiveness, so it's entirely up to you. Alright, you need to understand how screen sizes work. Make sure you're aware of your screen resolution when coding. Even if it does seem obvious, it's actually the #1 issue with responsiveness. I built entire websites for clients, and then when they pulled up the website in front of me on their desktop device and it was completely broken, I assure you right now, that was the biggest screw up I've ever done as a developer. So please do not do what I did. Here's the best advice I can give to fix this specific problem. First of all, regardless of your screen size, go into Inspect Element and create a 1080p preset. If your screen resolution is higher than 1080p, you want to stay in Inspect Element and code in that 1080p preset. If your screen resolution is 1080p exactly, close out Inspect Element and just code normally. If your screen resolution is smaller than 1080p, the best thing you can do is to find a monitor that is 1080p and plug that in and code on that one. But if you can't do that, I have another solution, which is to actually just zoom out your browser to around 75%. It's not the greatest thing to do, but it's probably the best solution you can do if you don't have the budget to buy a 1080p monitor or you just don't want to. By the way, I picked 1080p because 1080p is the most used screen resolution in the world. It's the best decoding and it's just a good middle ground between 4K and the smallest, which is 320 pixels. Alright, let me address the actual build process now. You'll want to focus each part of your website as a section so you can go section by section for responsiveness. First of all, build your website for desktop, which I went over earlier, but you want to have a mental view of what you're going to have your website look like in mobile view, and this will just save you time in the future so that when you do scale it down, you already have an idea of what you were looking for anyway. It's also worth noting that if you have a section that is purely ornamental, it's completely fine to remove it for just mobile view. In mobile view specifically, it's actually okay to have less stuff on the website and just focus on the content itself. Alright, I'm going to say something that's a little bit controversial now, but I swear 90% of the problems I've had have come from this one thing. There's a gut feeling you have as a developer when you create stuff, and you just know immediately if the code you made or the component you just created is clean or messy. That gut feeling, as weird as it does sound, is legitimately the best way you'll know if the code you created is going to have a hard time scaling down for mobile. If you developed a lot of websites before, you probably have an idea of what I'm talking about, but if you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. Just make sure that your code is clean to the best of what you think it is, and you'll probably be okay. Some other things to note is to make sure that you know how to utilize CSS units effectively for responsive designs. If you don't know too much about that, I have a full guide in the description, but if you don't want to check that video out, the simplest thing to do is to make sure you're using rem. Utilize the rule of 8, meaning that all gaps, margin, and padding are in increments of 8. One final thing to note, make sure you're using flexbox primarily. I know that grid is really useful, but from my experience, I've had a far easier time with flexbox. If you're using Tailwind, make sure that you're using their set breakpoints, otherwise use the breakpoints I'm going to have on screen here. Generally, the easiest thing to do when it comes to media queries is to have your desktop view cut off at 768 pixels and then just have your mobile view from down there. I personally would not recommend having an entire tablet section. It's mostly unnecessary. Most people don't use tablets anyway. Let's start by scaling up to 4K and beyond. If you built it for 1080p, it should scale just fine if you followed all the stuff I told you to do in the last few sections. Some things I've seen other developers do though, if you do care about this, is to set a max width for your website. What you could do is set a max width for a component to around 1500 pixels, and that way it won't ever exceed that width, meaning that whatever size you set for it in 1080p will stay the same at 4K. If you want to do that, you can go ahead, but otherwise you should not need to worry about 4K. For scaling down to mobile, you generally want to go section by section and then just bring the slider horizontally on inspect element and find each breakpoint and fix it at that very breakpoint. As you go down, make sure that you're decreasing the padding and margin. And in addition, in flexbox, you want to either change it from row to column or vice versa. One final thing, make sure you're utilizing flex wrap. It's really useful for smaller devices. Finally, you only want to go down as far as 320 pixels. This is the smallest you will ever need to go that's realistically used. If a section of your website is not scaling down well, the only good advice I can give is honestly just to nuke that part of the website and just remake the HTML structure or the CSS. It's better to know what you're doing and have a clean structure than having a bunch of band-aided code on your website that you don't even think is clean yourself. Finally, the last thing you should know is due to a concept called safe margins on mobile view, I would not fully trust the mobile view on inspect element. I would actually pull up your website on a phone before finally shipping it, because there is added margins that a phone has that your browser will just add for you that you will not see in inspect and can catch you off guard if you're not careful. Alright, here are some final things that are worth knowing that don't fit into any specific section. If you're using Figma, from all of my experience as a web developer using Figma, I assure you every single time I've tried to work with it, every single number has always been wrong. For example, if your text size is 32 pixels on Figma, it's nearly always not actually 32 pixels but something else. If you're new to responsiveness and you don't fully understand what you're doing, from experience, Tailwind seems to just be responsive by nature. Even when I didn't know half of the stuff I just said in the video, when I was using Tailwind, it just seems to work. It's a small thing, but if you don't know too much about responsiveness and you want to use a tool that just is responsive by nature, I would use Tailwind. If you're short on time, there are two things you can do if you don't want to deal with responsiveness too much. Either you can reuse section of your website via component-based building, which is what a lot of frameworks are built on anyway, or you can keep your website extremely simple. Both are fine because then you can just change the actual content on the component, and that way you only need to do responsiveness for one component and you can reuse that multiple times. If you can, try to use SVGs for responsiveness because they can scale using math instead of actual pixels, and that way they will always look good on any size. If you found this video useful, just let me know in the comments. I don't need more than that.